There was a time when the horizon itself was a promise, when the edges of maps bled into blank parchment and the land stretched vast and untamed beneath a sky too wide to measure. Long before fences, before towns, before sermons echoed through clappered churches. This was a place of rivers and silence, a land that belonged to others for thousands of years. Then came the settlers, carrying their hopes, their fears, and their God. Here, faith and frontier grew side by side, tangled like roots beneath the desert floor. And in that uneasy soil, stories like this one were born. Welcome to Dust and Echoes. My name is James Cawley, and every week I bring you a new original story. Stories drawn from that strange place where memory, myth, and the things we try not to name all intersect. If you enjoy what you hear, leaving a review helps more than you know. Tonight's story unfolds against that raw and restless backdrop. A young family trying to carve a home out of sandstone and silence. And a community where faith is both sanctuary and weapon. This is a story about resilience, betrayal, and the fire that rises when the sacred is twisted into something dangerous. And what happens when one woman's grief is forged into something unbreakable. I call this story Redemption. This story is dedicated to Crystal. Her strength inspires me in all I do. The San Juan River twisted like a knife through sandstone and sage, its muddy current crawling between white cliffs and sun-bleached driftwood. 10 miles beyond the town, new and clumsy as a calf on ice, stood a cabin. Just one. No fence. No neighbors. Emma Hawthorne lifted a sack of flour onto her hip with a grunt. The sun bore down on her bonnet, and her dress clung with sweat to her spine. Her boots scraped dry earth as she left town behind, heading toward the hazy shimmer of distant cottonwoods where the river turned. Behind her, the faint outline of Blanding flickered like a mirage, a makeshift town full of saints who believed she didn't belong. They'd come here from New York, chasing a dream as brittle as the land itself. Her husband had chosen this place, this stretch of wild nothing, believing they could carve out a ranch, raise cattle, and raise their boy far from the crowded stink of the East. And maybe Emma once believed it too. But months had passed. Their roof leaked, the ground cracked. The welcome from the townspeople, warm at first, had frozen over into sidelong glances and cold silences. It was the baptism that broke it. The bishop had come to their cabin with his scriptures and the confidence of a snake, arriving offering salvation with a smile that didn't quite match his eyes. Her husband had thanked him kindly, said they had their own way of speaking to God. No need for dunkings or titles, just family and prayer when it was honest. From that day on, the town had turned its shoulder to them. They were the definition of outsiders. Emma adjusted the sack again, swatting dust from her skirt as she crested a ridge. Sage and rabbit brush swept out before her in yellow-green waves. She was near the halfway point now. A mile or two more to the river, then down the slope to the cabin. She didn't mind the walk, not really. It was the stairs in town, the whispers, the way the merchant tried to short her on sugar. That's what bit. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him. The horse came up behind her at a slow trot, casual, calculated. She didn't turn around until he was beside her. The Bishop of Blanding sat tall in the saddle, his wide-brimmed hat casting a sharp line across his face. His beard was neatly trimmed, his shirt spotless despite the dust. "How about I carry that for you?" he said, gesturing to the flower. "I've got it," Emma said flatly. He smiled, too smooth. A woman shouldn't be carrying such a load under this sun. They walked in silence for a dozen paces, him riding slowly beside her, the horse's hooves muffled in the dust. "You know," he said, "you'd be welcome in our community. Truly welcome. Not just for Sunday service. You're a fine woman, Emma." She didn't answer. Her jaw clenched. "You don't belong out there," he went on. "Your husband is stubborn and misguided. We all fall in with the wrong people sometimes." She stopped walking. Her arms ached under the weight of the sack, but she stood her ground. "You can turn that horse around now, Bishop, and you can take your forgiveness and keep it." He leaned forward in the saddle, face darkening. "Careful, Emma. A woman alone in this territory should show more humility, especially with a child. Does he even go to school?" Emma took a step back, the sack lowering slightly in her arms. "You stay away from my family." His eyes suddenly became sharp. He wasn't used to a woman talking to him this way. "I control who trades in this town. I control who is welcomed, and I control who is protected." She stared at him, mouth dry. "There have been incidents," he said softly. "Indian raids. People in town are safe, but out where you live, well, you're exposed." Emma spit into the dirt between them. He recoiled slightly, his smile slipping. "All I'm saying is you better be careful out there, all alone." He turned the horse sharply and galloped away, kicking up dust as he went. Emma watched him vanish into the distance. Her arms trembled with rage and exhaustion. When she turned back toward the river, the wind had shifted. Something in it carried the weight of warning. The last mile passed slower than the rest. Emma's thoughts churned heavier than the sack of flour pressing into her hip. Her boots found every rut and stone along the faint trail carved through the sage. By the time she saw the smoke rising from their chimney, the sun had dipped low behind the red cliffs, casting long shadows over the land. The cabin stood alone against the coming dark, squat, weather-worn, and resolute. Logs had gone gray from sun and wind. The small lean-to for wood creaked in the breeze. A single swing, nothing more than a plank and rope, hung from the cottonwood beside the river. It moved gently, empty. She set down the sack on the porch with a groan and opened the door. Inside, her husband stood by the fire, stirring something in a black pot. The room smelled of stew and charred meat, but familiar warmth clung to the air. Their son, Eli, wasn't inside. "You're late," her husband said without looking up. "Town give you trouble again?" She didn't answer right away. She hung her bonnet on the peg by the door, rubbed the back of her neck, then stepped into the room with heavy feet. He turned at the silence, immediately reading the look on her face. "What happened?" She closed her eyes for a beat. Then, quietly, she said, "The bishop rode up, on my way out." His brow furrowed. "What did he want?" "He offered to carry the flour, told me I looked lovely, said I'd be welcome if I ever left my ungodly husband." Her husband's eyes narrowed. "Said you're stubborn and misguided." The wooden spoon in his hand snapped in half. Emma flinched at the sound. Her husband stared at the broken piece, then threw it into the hearth. "I'll kill him." He stepped past her, heading straight for the rifle hung above the door. "No." She grabbed his arm. "No, you won't." His voice was low, trembling with restrained fury. "He's threatening my wife, suggesting you leave me. He said something else." She swallowed. "Said there have been Indian raids lately. That people in town are safe, but not us." He looked down at her. That a threat? It felt like one. The fire crackled behind them. Outside, a distant coyote let out a sharp cry, answered by another. The land always seemed to speak louder in moments like this. as if warning or watching. Her husband set the rifle down gently, his breath still tight in his chest. "I don't want to leave," he said. "But you're right. They're tightening the noose." "I don't want to leave either," she whispered, surprising herself. "I just want to live without bending." He reached up and gently brushed her hair behind her ear. His thumb lingered against her cheek. "We've got our own kind of faith. Doesn't come from a book, comes from here." He tapped her chest. "And from that boy of ours." As if summoned, Eli burst through the door, cheeks flushed, hair full of twigs. He held a lizard in both hands, grinning. "Mama, look what I caught." Emma forced a smile. "You'd better let him go before he bites your nose off." Eli laughed and set the lizard on the porch. It darted off into the dusk. "What's going on?" he asked. "Just talking," his father said, tousling the boy's hair. "Go wash up. Supper's almost ready." The family sat around the small wooden table as the light faded outside. Emma served stew and fresh bread. They each shared one good thing from the day, a tradition her husband had started when the long silences became too much to bear. Eli said the river was lower today, and he saw fish flipping in the shallows. Her husband said the calf he thought was sick was doing better. Emma, after a pause, said she saw a hummingbird that hovered so still she thought it was a trick of the light. After supper, Eli lay curled in the bedroll near the fire. Emma and her husband sat quietly, watching the flames. She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm not going to let them take this from us," he said. "I know," she whispered. But in the dark, something in her heart began to thrum. Something she couldn't name. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. Outside, the land exhaled, and the night began. A sharp creak snapped Emma awake. At first, she thought it was only the cabin settling, the way wood sighs when the night air cools. But then a rough hand touched her shoulder. She opened her eyes to see her husband crouched beside the bed, finger pressed to his lips. In the glow of the dying fire, he looked carved from stone. He pointed to his ear. "Horses," he breathed. Her pulse quickened. She pushed herself up, careful not to make the bed frame squeal. The boy slept near the hearth, his small back rising and falling under a worn quilt. Her husband stood, moving as silently as the floorboards would allow, and lifted the rifle from its hooks on the wall. He motioned for her to stay put, then padded to the door. His hand closed around the latch. He tilted his head, listening. Outside, hooves shuffled softly over sand, a low snort, then silence. He eased the door open a crack and bent to look. The door exploded inward with a crash. Her husband was thrown backwards across the room, rifle clattering to the floorboards. Emma scrambled to her feet just as 5 figures burst into the cabin. Men daubed in streaks of red and black, faces obscured by paint and shadow. Their cries cut the air, not words, but hoots and barks that filled the small space like a storm. The lead man snatched up the fallen rifle. 2 others lunged for Emma and Eli. Eli woke with a start. He bolted upright, saw the men, and ran to his father's side without hesitation. The attackers glanced at each other, a flicker of surprise at the boy's courage, before one swung the rifle butt into the child's ribs. Eli folded to the floor with a gasp. Her husband roared, dazed but not broken, and pushed to his knees. The lead man raised the rifle and fired. The shot cracked like a whip. Her husband staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his shirt. He toppled backwards into the dirt between the table and the hearth. Emma screamed. Her fingers found the handle of the kitchen knife on the table before she had even thought. She lunged at the lead man, blade flashing in the dim light. He threw up his hand to block. The knife bit deep from the base of his middle finger down through his palm to the wrist, splitting flesh. Blood spilled hot over her knuckles. He howled. 2 others caught her from behind. Her hair ripped from its pins as they wrenched her arms back. She kicked, spat, but the 3rd man came at her with the rifle stock raised. She caught a last glimpse of her husband sprawled on the floor, eyes glassy, blood pooling dark. She saw Eli's small hand reaching for him. The rifle butt swung down. A white crack of pain split her skull, and everything went black. Heat. That was the first thing. Not pain, not sound. Just the unbearable weight of heat pressing down on her, blistering and alive. Then the smoke came, thick and sour. It clawed its way into her mouth as she gasped awake, choking. Her eyes burned. Something crackled above her. Fire. Flames danced along the rafters, curling over the beams like orange vines. The thatch was already ablaze. The cabin was on fire, with her still inside. She tried to move and couldn't. Every inch of her body screamed in protest. Her ribs felt cracked, broken maybe, each breath sharp and ragged. Her right eye was swollen shut. Blood crusted her lips. Her teeth, some were gone. She could taste the empty space in her jaw. Her head throbbed with a deep, thunderous ache. She rolled onto her side, groaning, and there he was. Her husband lay on the floor, just feet away, face turned toward her. Emma's body seized. The air around her reeled, but she crawled, dragged herself across the dirt floor inch by inch. She reached him and took hold of his shirt. "Wake up," she whispered, voice shredded by smoke and grief. "Please, wake up." But he didn't move. The blood had dried down his ribs in dark streaks. Her hand slid to his chest, seeking breath, heartbeat, something. But there was nothing but stillness. He was dead. She looked around the cabin, blinking through tears. The fire had eaten half the back wall already. Sparks dropped from the rafters. The roof would come down soon. Eli. Where was Eli? She screamed his name, ragged and hoarse. "Eli!" No answer. Not in the corner, not on the floor. He was gone. Taken. Her scream turned to a cry, a deep, wounded animal sound. She had nothing left, but she pulled harder, dragged her husband's body across the floor with bloodied hands. Her knees tore open on the wood as she heaved him through the threshold and onto the porch. The rain came all at once. Fat drops pounding the earth. A sudden deluge that soaked her to the bone in seconds. Lightning ripped across the sky. Thunder cracked, echoing off the cliffs. She collapsed beside him, hands gripping what remained of his shirt, her fingers trembling. Mud slicked her palms, mixing with blood, with ash. She bent over his chest and let out a sound too raw to be language. She screamed at God and pleaded with him in the same breath, cursed him, called for him, demanded an answer, but none came. Wind swept the smoke sideways, pushing it out over the canyon. The fire inside the cabin roared, unstoppable. Flames leapt through the windows and licked at the eaves, devouring everything they had built. She didn't care. She knelt there beside him, in the mud and the firelight, and began to dig with her hands. No tools, just fingers and rage and grief. The earth was heavy clay already soaked by rain. Each scoop tore her skin open. Blood ran down her wrists and vanished into the muck. Her knuckles split. Fingernails cracked. She dug deeper, teeth clenched, sobs catching in her throat. There were no tracks. The rain had already washed them away. The men who took Eli had vanished into the dark, and she was left with nothing but fire and earth. Then lightning split the night again, a bright jagged scar across the sky, and in its light she saw him, a figure, still and silent in the sagebrush, maybe 100 feet away, old, bent, a blanket wrapped around narrow shoulders, and on one shoulder, unmistakable in silhouette, a bird, a raven. He didn't move. Emma's eyes locked on him through the haze of rain and firelight. Her heart beat like a drum, her fingers clenched in the dirt, but he just stood there, watching. This old Indian man must have come to watch what his people were doing. She was filled with rage at this thought. She tried to rise, managed to step toward him before the world tilted. Her vision spun sideways. Blood roared in her ears. The pain from her broken ribs screamed through her again, and then darkness took her once more. Flies buzzed against her face. That was what pulled her from the darkness. The irritating tickle of wings crawling across her cheek. She swatted blindly, groaned, and rolled onto her side. The sun was up, low and sharp in the sky, flooding the world with that flat, reddish morning light. Everything smelled like wet ash, scorched wood, and earth. Her tongue was dry and swollen, her face stiff with blood. Then she remembered. Her husband. He wasn't beside her. She looked around wildly until her eyes landed on the ground a few feet away. The grave. She blinked, stunned. It was real, not just a dream or a trick of the smoke. A long, narrow pit had been dug in the earth beside the juniper tree. Not deep, but clean. Beside it, a pile of pale orange sandstone chunks. She hadn't done that. No matter how hard she'd tried, no matter how much she bled, her hands were useless last night. She could barely even stand. Her gaze dropped into the hole. There he was. Her husband lay inside, arms folded over his chest. A sprig of sage had been tucked between his fingers. A small, strange bundle wrapped in what looked like cloth and leather rested on his forehead. Emma staggered to her knees beside the grave, a moan curling out of her throat. She reached down and pulled the bundle free, stared at it like it might bite. Then she stood and threw it hard into the brush. Another cry tore out of her as she turned away, shaking. "No," she muttered. "Don't you dare sanctify him." She couldn't bear it. Not pity, not ritual, not anything. Whoever had done this, they had no right. No right to touch him, to make symbols of him. They had taken everything. This one gesture didn't balance the scale. Nothing could. Still, she stared at the grave, shaking, and she knew. The old man and the sage, he had done this, dug this, laid the sage in the strange bundle like offerings. She hadn't dreamed him, and he had spared her. She didn't know why. She collapsed back to the dirt, exhausted beyond words. Her hands throbbed with pain, and her ribs ached with every breath. Her head spun, her vision still blurred on the edges. But she pushed dirt over the grave anyway, pulled it in with her arms and elbows, one clump at a time, until he was covered. She stacked the flat stones with trembling fingers, just enough to keep the animals away. Then she crawled to the smoldering ruins of the cabin. Everything was gone, blackened timbers. The metal pot warped in the fire. Her bread pan melted into the hearthstone. She found nothing. So she started walking. She walked for hours. The sun beat down without mercy, drying the blood to a crust across her cheek and down her jaw. Her ribs burned with each step. Her face was swollen and pulsing. The taste of smoke still coated her throat. When she finally reached the gates of Blanding, the two men on guard shouted in alarm. "Get help!" one cried. "Someone get the doctor. There's a woman." Emma ignored them and pushed through. They parted. The wooden gate creaked behind her as she walked, limping but steady. The town was awake now. People gathered near the main street, heads turning as she passed. Women paused with wash buckets, men lowered sacks from wagons. Confusion at first, Then recognition. Someone gasped. A name was whispered. Emma Hawthorne. People whispered about Indian attacks. Now she stood in front of them, bloodied, scorched, with fire still in her eyes. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She walked straight toward the church. The guards at the doors stepped forward, clearly nervous. "You'll need to wait," one said. "The bishop is in council." Emma didn't slow. She pushed past him with sudden strength, her shoulders slamming into his chest. "Ma'am!" the first one called out. "Stop!" She threw open the heavy wooden door and stormed inside. The interior of the church was quiet and dim, the air cool against her skin. Oil lamps flickered along the walls. The bishop standing near the altar with two other men at his side, deep in private conversation. All three turned sharply at the sound of the door. For a long second, no one moved. Then the bishop smiled. It was the kind of smile that belonged in courtrooms and snake dens. She stepped forward, her voice cracked. "They took my son." The bishop glanced at the other men and then asked her with concern in his voice, "Emma, who took your son? What has happened? We need to get you to the doctor immediately." "No," she said as she stepped up to face him. "I'll do what you say. Baptism. Marriage. If you help me get my son back." The bishop nodded slowly. "Of course. We'll make everything right again." But she wasn't looking at his face anymore. She was looking at his hand, the one he kept behind his back. He noticed too late. "Let me see it," she said. "It's nothing. Let me see your hand." The two men stepped forward, trying to block her path. "Emma," the bishop began, but she advanced. "Let me see it," she repeated. He didn't move. Then she saw it, not his hand, not yet, but a smear of black just behind his right ear, a faint, thin streak of paint. Her breath caught. It was the same paint worn by the one who struck her, the one she cut, the one who killed her husband. "You," she breathed. His eyes flickered. Her mind filled with rage at the sudden realization. It was not Indians. It was these men, dressed and painted like Indians. "You murdered him," she said. "You took my son." Still, he didn't move. The mask cracked, not all at once, but in subtle ways. His posture shifted. His smile slipped. He looked at his men. "Close the doors," he said. The doors shut with a heavy thud. The light from outside vanished. He turned back to her, and now the friendliness was gone. "You should have died in that fire," he said quietly. Her fists clenched. "I gave you a chance for something better, and you spit in my face." He nodded once. Looking into her eyes without compassion, he spoke to his men. "Finish it." Voice low but steady. The one nearest him, the bearded man, older than the others, shifted uncomfortably. "You told me to kill her last night," he said, his voice tight. "I wouldn't then, and I won't now. I lit the fire. That's enough. That's already more than I..." The bishop rounded on him. "Don't you dare talk about limits. You stood there while your brethren fulfilled the Lord's will." The bishop glared at the bearded man for his defiance. "You knew what was required, what we went there to do." "No, I did not go with you to commit violence," the older man replied, holding his ground. Emma's voice cut through the tension. "You call murder God's will?" The bishop's face snapped toward her. "You cut me. You disrespected his servants. You spat on an offer of redemption. You lost your husband because of your arrogance. You've been given more mercy than you deserve. But now..." He turned back to the men. "This ends." The bearded man stared at the floor. The bishop's voice dropped to a hard whisper. "Take her out. Make sure no one sees you leave. Do it in the barn. Quiet. Quick. And be rid of this mess." He stepped away from them all, turning toward the table behind him. The two younger men moved forward and grabbed Emma roughly by the arms. "Don't you dare touch me!" she yelled as she attempted to fight them back. But it was useless. In her condition, she was no match for the two. As they grabbed her, she looked to the older bearded man. He looked away and glared at the bishop. One slapped a hand over her mouth. "Don't make this worse," he hissed. They pulled her through the back door of the church into the alley behind. No one saw. The townspeople had gathered at the front, whispering, wondering why the bishop had closed the doors. No one came around back. No one heard. They dragged her behind the buildings, past the chicken coops and stacked barrels, and into the old barn. The inside was dark, shafts of light filtering through gaps in the walls. Dust swirled in the air, and the scent of hay and old wood mixed with the iron tang of dried blood still crusted on her face. The door creaked shut behind them. She kicked out again, panting. The bearded man stepped forward. "We're not going to kill you." The other two looked at him confused. He held up a hand. "We're not." He took off his hat slowly. "I'm afraid the bishop has been misguided by a darkness within him." The other two men looked at him with shock and anger. This was blasphemy. The bearded man's eyes went from Emma to the younger men. "We are bound to him, yes, but only if he walks the path of God. Last night, my brothers, we followed him away from that path. Even if we are bound to this place, assigned here to serve under him, we do not need to further tarnish our souls." Their contempt dissolved into disgrace upon their faces. They knew this to be the truth. The bearded man continued, "This is what we are going to do. The two of you will dig a grave here in the barn. Then, fetch the carcass of Brother Hamilton's pig, the one that had the sickness that we disposed of in the ravine last week. It will stink to high heaven, but we'll throw him off just in case he wants to check in on our work. Wrap it up tight." He looked into Emma's eyes. "While they do that, I'll smuggle you out of town in my wagon. But you can never return. This is the best I can do." She stared at him, breathing hard. "And what happens to my son? I need Eli." "We will keep him safe," he said. "We make sure he's fed, watched over, that he's not mistreated." The man met her eyes. "It's all we can do. If the bishop finds out we let you go, he'll have us all hanged as traitors. And the boy, he won't be spared. He'll suffer, Emma. This way you live, and he lives. You expect me to just disappear? To walk away from my son? No," he said. "I expect you to survive, and to trust in God that someday, maybe, things may change around here. But until then, we must bend to him if we are to survive here." Emma stared at him for a long moment, the room spinning with rage, pain, and a terrible, helpless grief. She pressed her palm against the post behind her to stay upright. Her fingers curled around the rough wood. "Can I at least see my son?" "Tell him goodbye," she whispered, breaking into tears. He stepped closer. "I'm sorry, Emma. If this is to work, we must leave now. I swear to you, I'll keep him safe." She looked at him long and hard. There was something in his eyes that she trusted. Or was it just that she had no other choice? Then, finally, she gave a slow, broken nod. He nodded back. "Then we don't waste time." The wagon creaked down the slope behind the town just before dusk. Canvas pulled over the top, the wheels cutting through soft, rain-washed ruts. It moved without ceremony or procession, just another cart headed toward the far homesteads or maybe the river. The story the bishop had told to those waiting outside the church was already accepted and whispered through the community. A lie accepted too quickly, and the people moved on. The bishop's quiet reassurances that her soul was in the Lord's hands was all they wanted to hear. Beneath the canvas of the wagon, Emma lay curled in a pine crate lined with blankets and old burlap sacks. Her ribs ached with every bump. The heat inside was stifling, and with every breath she inhaled the scent of pitch, dirt, and dried horse dung. The bearded man held the wagon's reins, moving them forward in silence. She had seen him in town before, but still did not know his name. But it was clear he was the bishop's right hand. His face was drawn, his eyes hollow. A man caught between what he believed and what he'd done. He hadn't spoken since they'd loaded her into the box, save for one sentence whispered through the slats. "May God be with you." When they reached the edge of the burned clearing where her cabin had once stood, he stopped the wagon. Emma climbed out slowly, limbs stiff, breath shallow. Her boots hit the dirt softly. The air was sharp and clean here, the river murmuring just out of sight through the cottonwoods. The grave stood where she had left it, the stones stacked atop it in reverent disarray. He looked at it for a long time. Then he removed his hat and bowed his head. "I'll make sure your boy's taken care of," he said, his voice barely audible. "But do not underestimate the bishop, Emma, if you come back. He will kill both of you." Emma looked at the old man and asked him one final question. "If you truly believe in God, then why are you such a coward?" Emma stared directly at him, her body bruised and bandaged, face half shadowed in the fading light. A tear traced the man's cheek. He turned back to the wagon, climbed aboard, and left without another word. The wheels rolled down the trail, the sound of hooves fading into the hum of dusk. Emma stood still, alone beside her husband's grave, the fire-blackened ruins of their life behind her. Then she turned toward the river. The moon had started to rise, pale and broken through the clouds. She followed the rocky edge, one foot in front of the other, walking into the silver-dark wild. There was no plan, no destination, just away. Away from the bishop, away from the town, away from everything except the one thing that mattered. Eli. Her legs trembled, body on the edge of collapse. When she reached the base of a wide sandstone bluff, she dropped to her knees, then lowered herself to the ground. Her eyes drifted upward, watching the red cliffs above darken into black. Somewhere behind her, the ruins of her life smoldered. And her son lived under a monster's shadow. And somewhere ahead, she would find the strength to return. But not tonight. She closed her good eye and slept beneath the swirl of stars, the now faraway sound of the river whispering to her in a language older than grief. A harsh squawk tore through the quiet. Emma jerked awake, the ground cold beneath her and the air thin with early morning chill. The sky above was painted in deep red light, the first edges of dawn peeling over the distant bluffs. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then her ribs screamed and it all returned. The fire, the grave, the blood on her hands. Eli. She sat up, teeth clenched, breath shallow. Her body felt carved from stone. Every part of her ached, bruised or broken. Her right eye was still swollen, mostly shut, and when she moved her jaw, pain lanced through the place where her teeth had once been. There, the noise again. She turned her head and froze. A raven stood just a few feet away, hopping once across the sand. Its feathers were molting, ragged and old. Its eyes were white, not pale, not gray, but milky and fully blind. Yet somehow, it looked directly at her. Emma scrambled to sit up straighter, fingers finding the smooth surface of a nearby stone. Not that she could fight, not in her state, but the instinct was still there. The bird tilted his head. Then came the figure. He stepped from the sagebrush with hands raised, palms outward in peace. She recognized him instantly. It was the same old Indian man from the storm. She blinked hard. He wore the same threadbare blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Long gray hair tied loosely behind his head. Thin face marked with deep lines carved from time and sun. The raven flapped once, then lifted off the ground and landed on his shoulder, settling there like it belonged. He said a word, soft, guttural, foreign. Beichu. She didn't respond for several seconds. She just stared at this man standing above her. I don't understand that. Do you speak English? Talk like this? She asked, pointing to her mouth. He said nothing. Instead, he walked slowly toward her, keeping his movements small, deliberate, non-threatening. He stopped several feet away and crouched, knees cracking as he did. Then he reached down and picked up a stick from the dirt. He began to draw in the sand. Emma watched. He scratched the outline of a small cabin, then several stick figures outside. He drew fire coming from the cabin. He pointed at the 4 figures standing outside the drawing of her cabin on fire, then to his face. He picked up dirt and wiped it across his face like war paint. He circled the men, pointed at them. Then he pointed to himself and shook his head. She watched him carefully. The message was clear. Not him, not his people. He pointed again to the war-painted figures, then drew another shape beside them. A cross. Simple. Straight lines intersecting. Then, slowly, he pointed to the cross. Then to the cabin. Then to the 4 attackers. Emma's throat tightened as she nodded, letting him know she understood. She pointed at the men in the drawing, mimed grabbing something, then cradled her arms as if holding a child. They stole my son, she told him. He did not understand her words, but he understood the gesture. The man's face changed, softer now, sad. He nodded. He understood. She closed her eyes for a moment and opened them again to see him pulling a small gourd from the leather pouch at his hip. He poured a thick green paste into one palm, then looked at her and pointed toward her face. The broken skin, the swelling, the deep bruises. He moved slowly. She gave him a small nod. He stepped forward on his knees and gently, almost reverently, dabbed the paste onto her wounds. It was cool and sharp-smelling, crushed plants, maybe pine and something acrid. She flinched as it touched raw flesh, but didn't pull away. He said something under his breath as he worked, words she didn't understand. A prayer, maybe. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and unwrapped a bundle from his satchel, dried meat. He broke off a piece and handed it to her. She took it. Her hands were still shaking as she ate, being careful to chew with the teeth she still had. They sat in silence. The sun climbed a little higher. The world warmed. The wind moved through the sage like whispering voices. The raven shifted on the man's shoulder and let out a croak. Emma looked at the man. "You saw it all, didn't you?" she said while pointing at the drawing, at her eyes, then at him. He didn't answer, but his expression was steady, his eyes clear. He nodded. She swallowed, wiped her mouth, and said softly, "They have my son, and I don't have a choice." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he raised one hand into a fist, a gesture of defiance, of strength. Emma looked at him. "Fight," she said aloud. He repeated the word, slow and imperfect, nodding. "Fight." She stared at the horizon. "How?" she asked. The man pointed to himself, then to her, then to his head, tapped it once. then mimed swinging something, a weapon, an attack. Emma looked down at her empty hands, then at the drawings in the sand. The old man lifted his chin, face firm. He raised his fist once more, pointed at himself, then back to her. She understood what he meant. He would help her. She didn't know what he could possibly give her, an old man with a blind bird and soft voice. But something inside her stirred. She had no other options, and something the bearded man said had stuck with her. Something about God's path. Inside her heart, she reached for direction on her own path and found it. She nodded once. The old man stood slowly, creaking like old wood. He whistled, a sharp, breathy sound, and the raven launched into the air and returned to his shoulder. He said a word, something like, "Hoochoo." The bird blinked, then closed both eyes. The man turned and began to walk. Emma rose unsteadily to her feet and followed. They walked for hours. The old man led without words, navigating dry riverbeds and steep sandstone washes with the sure-footed grace of someone who had walked this land since birth. The raven, Hoochoo, stayed perched on his shoulder, silent and still, like a second set of eyes. Emma followed a few paces behind, her body sore and slow, but her spirit kindled with something new. Not hope, not yet, but direction. The sun climbed higher. The land changed. The open sage gave way to narrow corridors of red rock and shadow, twisted canyons that ran cool with morning shade, and ancient silence. Petroglyphs dotted the stone, long figures with horned heads, spirals, sunbursts, marks worn deep by wind and time. She said nothing. The old man paused at a wide panel, its surface scoured clean, but painted again in red ochre. Unlike the others, this drawing was more recent, not fresh, but not ancient-looking like the rest. Emma stepped closer and stared. It showed a battle, crude, but unmistakable. A single large figure stood in the center, not tall, but wide and armored, a sword or staff in one hand, his shoulders broad, helmeted. Around him were many smaller figures with spears and shields, painted in motion, mid-attack. The old man pointed to one of the attackers, a stick figure lunging with a spear, drawn closest to the armored shape. Then he pointed to himself. Emma looked at him. "Is that you?" she asked. He nodded, then pointed to the large figure again, and mimed slashing across his own throat. Emma studied the panel again. This wasn't a painting of defeat. It was memory. A record. She pointed at him, then made the slash gesture, then to the large figure. "You killed him." He nodded again, not boastful, just truthful. Then his expression grew more serious. He tapped his chest twice, then his head. She was unsure what this meant, but the old man had a look on his face that warned to be careful. He turned and began to climb, small steps and handholds carved into the sandstone she hadn't noticed until now. They blended into the stone, almost invisible in the cliffside. She followed, pressing hands and boots into the stone. Her legs burned. Her ribs ached. But she climbed. Halfway up, she saw it. A wall, stone fitted with mud mortar, not part of the natural cliff, but set into it. Ancient. Hidden. A doorway blocked by a square slab of sandstone, sealed at the edges with dried clay. The old man reached a small ledge in front of this wall, where he knelt and began breaking the seal with a sharp-edged rock. Hoochoo landed and began to peck at the mortar alongside him. Emma completed the climb and began to help. Together, they scraped and cracked the hardened mud until the slab shifted with a dry groan. The man stood and pulled. The doorway slab fell outward and to the ground below with a crash. A breath of cold air escaped the chamber beyond, dry and old and heavy with dust. He pulled a handful of cottonwood cotton from his pouch, wrapped it around a stick, and molded it into a sticky ball using pine resin. Then he struck 2 stones together. Sparks flared. Caught. The torch ignited. He ducked and stepped inside. Emma followed. The interior was low and silent. The flame cast long shadows on the walls. It smelled of dust, earth, and time. At the center of the room sat a figure. Emma stopped. It was a body, seated on a stone platform, unmoving, encased in armor. Real armor. Rusted at the joints, but unmistakably metallic. The helmet, round and ridged, glinted in the firelight. A breastplate covered the rib cage. A sword lay across its lap, covered in a layer of dust. She stared, stunned. "I've seen this before," she whispered. "In a book, back when we were in New York." The book told the stories of Spanish expeditions in the New World. This looked just like the drawings in those books. This was conquistador armor. The old man stepped forward, reverent but not fearful. He lifted the helmet from the corpse's head. The skull beneath it tumbled forward and shattered into dust on the floor. Emma flinched. The man didn't pause. He turned and held the helmet out to her. She looked at him. "You want me to take it?" He nodded once. She stepped forward, hands trembling, and accepted the helmet. It was heavy, cold, and slick with dust. She turned it over and stared into the empty faceplate, then looked back at the sword. The man had already picked it up. He held it out to her. The blade shimmered dully in the torchlight. The steel was old but unbroken, etched with lines and symbols she couldn't read. A weapon carried across oceans, buried in blood. She took it. It fit her hands like it had been waiting. Then the old man stepped aside and pulled the chest plate free. The bones beneath it spilled onto the floor in a clatter. Ribs turned to ash. He held the armor out to her next. The armor was too large. The chest plate sagged on her shoulders. The helmet wobbled when she moved. And the sword, though beautifully balanced, felt awkward in her bruised hands. But Emma didn't complain. She didn't ask questions. When the old man handed her a length of rope made from willow bark fiber to bind the armor tight to her frame, she cinched it herself. The climb down was not as precarious as she feared, even in the bulky armor. Somehow, now tightened, it felt made for her. The old man and his bird lead her back through the winding cliffs. They walked until they found a small alcove tucked deep in the bend of a canyon where cottonwoods grew thick and the wind barely reached. There the old man built a fire, fed her again, and said very little. The raven, Hoochoo, remained close, hopping down to the ground to peck at bones and scraps. It watched Emma the way its master did, with a quiet, unreadable patience. The next morning the training began. It started with pain. The old man didn't ease her into it. He handed her the sword, gestured to the air, and barked a sharp syllable that meant strike. When she hesitated, he mimicked the movement himself, a long, clean cut through the space before him, foot planted, body firm. The movement he made was not that of a sword, but the jab of a spear. Then he pointed to her. She copied him clumsily. Again. He motioned this with his arm and a nod. He had her do this, over and over again for what seemed like hours. She started to slow. Exhaustion took over. Her wounds hurt, and she collapsed to the ground. He made the baby cradle gesture and raised his chin. She nodded and got back to her feet. She focused and stabbed again, her aim tighter this time. Again. The old man gestured, and again, and again. Her shoulder ached, her ribs flared with pain, but she kept going. He circled her as she practiced, occasionally bending to adjust her foot or arm, with a gentle touch to correct her stance. He barked sharp, rhythmic commands in his language, repeating certain words with rising intensity. When she staggered or hesitated, he shouted louder, not in anger, but with respect. She shouted back, at first in frustration, then with power. He smiled. Later, he picked up a long stick, holding it like a spear, like the drawing on the rocks, his weapon, and began to spar with her gently. He blocked her blade, redirected it, slapped it aside, not to humiliate her, but to teach her rhythm, control, balance. Every mistake earned a correction, every success a nod. When she collapsed once more, breathless, he again made the gesture, cradling arms. She stared at him, furious, panting. Her son's face was fixed in her mind. Then she picked the sword back up, and she continued through the pain for her boy. Day after day it continued. The hours blurred, the bruises multiplied. Her hands blistered, cracked, then calloused. The armor no longer slid when she moved. The helmet stopped wobbling. The sword began to feel like an extension of her own arm. She could feel herself changing, not just in strength, but in silence, in clarity. At night, they ate under the stars and watched the fire crackle. She learned to mimic some of his words, just as he mimicked hers. A slow, simple trait of language. Not much, just enough to understand. He never gave her his name. And when she asked, pointing to herself and saying, "Emma," then pointing to him, he would only nod, or smile faintly, or shake his head as if to say, "Not yet." He was her teacher. That was enough. She came to trust him fully, and he never once tried to take her pain away, only to shape it into something sharp. On the 7th morning, before the sun had broken the ridgeline, the old man shook Emma gently by the shoulder. Her body ached from sleep on stone and root, but she opened her eyes quickly. She could feel it in the air. Something had changed. He said nothing, only nodded once, then pointed back the way they had come, east. Then he made 2 signs. First, the cradle, arms curled as if holding a baby. Then his hand clenched into a fist. It was time. Emma sat up slowly, reaching for the armor beside her. The chest plate felt part of her now. Not snug, but somehow it felt natural. She placed the helmet on her head and held the sword at her side, the weight of it now familiar. The old man stood before her, the raven on his shoulder. He placed a hand on each of her shoulders and met her eyes, holding them. Then he closed his eyes and bowed his head. A prayer, soft and whispered in his language, old and rhythmic. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the weight, the reverence, the purpose. She bowed her head too. When he finished, he opened a pouch and brought out a small bundle. Ochre powder, red as fresh blood. He dipped his fingers in it, then reached up and drew 2 long lines down her face, one from forehead to cheek on each side. When she opened her eyes again, he stepped back and looked at her with something like pride. Respect. She nodded once. He turned, and they walked. The canyons gave way to sandstone spires jutting from vistas of sagebrush. They moved in silence, crossing the San Juan near its bend in the shallows, then climbing atop a ridge that overlooked Blanding. The town sat quiet below, roofs pale in the light of early morning. Wood smoke curled from chimneys. Chickens clucked in the distance. As they crested the final slope, the guards spotted them. The first man raised his rifle, his shock and fear at the sight approaching showing in his voice. "Stop!" he shouted. "That's far enough." Emma didn't break stride. The armor caught the sun now, dull but unmistakable. The sword gripped tight in her hand. Her broken smile under her helmet showing wide. The red paint on her face like streaks, like blood marks. She didn't look like anyone or anything they had ever seen. The second guard stumbled backward, terrified, tripping over himself and falling into the dirt. Behind her, the old man walked steady, saying his prayer with palms open, Raven still perched, unmoved by the chaos beginning to ripple through the town. 3 more men appeared from behind the town gate, confusion on their faces, rifles in hand and wide-eyed. She was close now, less than a stone's throw from the gate. The lead guard fired. The bullet struck the armor just above her heart and ricocheted off with a metallic shriek. Emma didn't flinch. She walked forward, gasps, swearing, panic. As rifles were raised and aimed at her, she kept walking. The old man began to pray louder now. His pace quickened until he was walking beside her with the rhythm of a drumbeat in his voice. His words echoed down the hill, strange and full of power. The raven let out a loud, dry croak, a sound like thunder in a deep canyon. Emma's voice bellowed from inside her helmet, and the eyes of the men went wide. "If you serve God," she called out to the line of armed men ahead, "and you believe in the Great Father, then walk with me on his path. If you do not, then I will send you to him." Her words rang like iron. The line wavered. No one fired again. For these were not bad people, she realized. Just people with a bad leader. The men holding rifles stared at her, open-mouthed as she passed through them and into the town. And behind her, the old man and Huchu. Slowly, the men followed. She walked straight through the dirt street, past townsfolk who had frozen in place. Women with baskets of flour, men with horses halfway saddled, children standing in silence. The townspeople turned as she passed. Some whispered, others stared openly. Then came the sound. Faint at first, then louder, singing, hymns, the church house. Her hand tightened on the hilt of the sword. She walked toward the sound. The heavy doors of the church swung open with a crack like thunder. The hymn died, mid-verse. Voices fell silent. The final chord from the pump organ wheezed out and lingered in the dusty air. Emma stood in the doorway, framed by the light behind her. A backlit, mysterious figure in armor, sword in hand. Red paint streaked down her face like war tears, dirt and smoke in her hair. A helmet that once belonged to a conqueror of other lands, now reborn on a mother made of grief and fury. Behind her, the old man stepped inside. The people in the pews gasped. Some stood, some clutched their mouths. Others simply stared. The bishop, standing at the pulpit, blinked once, then again. As if what he saw could not be real. His voice cracked when he spoke. "What is this?" Emma took a step forward. Her boot struck the wooden floor hard. "I'm here for my son." 3 men in the front pew, the bishop's men, the ones who had dragged her to the barn, stood at once. 2 drew revolvers. One reached for the boy. "Mama!" Eli recognized her voice instantly. He was sitting at the end of the front row, clutching the hand of a trembling older woman. He leapt to his feet and tried to run, but the bishop grabbed him. The boy struggled, crying. Emma's eyes locked on him, alive, small, frightened but unharmed. Her body ached to reach him. She stepped forward again. "Give me my son." The bishop's voice rose, laced with false calm. "Everyone remain seated. Remain calm. This will be resolved. "You told us she abandoned the boy, that she went crazy," someone whispered from the back. Murmurs were rising all around. Doubt, fear, confusion. Emma took another step. The two armed men pointed their pistols at her chest. The bishop pulled Eli tighter against him. His bandaged hand trembled. "Shoot her!" he ordered. The armed men hesitated. The bearded man stepped forward, signaling them to lower the weapons. "She's a demon," the bishop said louder. "Can't you see that she's possessed? Brainwashed by the heathen with her. And after Indians killed her husband. We must not stand for this in the house of the Lord." Emma smiled and pointed the sword at him. Her gaze focused, her breathing slow. "Let my son go now, and I'll spare your life." The congregation flinched. "I said shoot her!" the bishop shrieked, his voice cracking. "You're cowards! You'll be damned with her if you—" "Stop!" the bearded man screamed, his right-hand man. The armed men lowered their revolvers. Eli broke free and ran, ducking beneath the bishop's arms. He sprinted toward her with a sob. "Mama!" Emma dropped to her knees just in time to catch him. She wrapped both arms around him, sword still in one hand, helmet pressing against his head. He buried his face into the armor and cried. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you now." The bishop stood shaking at the pulpit, stunned, furious. People were standing in the pews now, watching. The bishop stepped forward, one hand outstretched. "You'll all pay for this. You'll be excommunicated. Banished. I command you to obey me." Emma stood slowly, her son clutching her leg. She walked up the aisle, past the eyes of the crowd, past the men who had once tried to kill her, past the whispers, the doubt, the fear. She stopped just before the pulpit. The bishop sneered. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You think you can just walk in here and do this? You cut me. You defied God. You spit in the face of his order." He raised his bandaged hand so all could see and preached. "She cut me. Do you see? She dares defy the hand of God." In one fast-practiced motion, she sliced his hand off at the wrist. Blood erupted, spraying over all those near. The bishop's face was wide with shock. She stepped towards him and he recoiled, her eyes stone behind the paint and metal. "My blade is the hand of God." She raised her leg and kicked the bishop in the chest, sending him flying backwards into the pulpit where he crashed to the ground. She flashed forwards, blade raised high. The bishop cowered on the floor, his bloody stump spurting, but the blade didn't touch him. Instead, she drove it down, hard, into the wood of the pulpit beside him. It stuck deep, the whole room flinching at the sound. The bishop's mouth opened, but for once, nothing came out. Emma unfastened the helmet and let it fall to the floor with a clang. She looked at him, blood and ash still on her face. Red paint dried like war tears down her cheeks. "You'll answer to God," she said, "but not through me." The old man stepped forward, quiet, still. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a length of leather, the strap he had worn around his neck. Without a word, he wrapped it around the bishop's forearm and tied it tight to slow the bleeding. The bishop watched him, trembling. He looked into the old man's face and saw something there. Something ancient. Something that knew him. Then he dropped his eyes and began to cry. The people turned away. The old man said nothing, only stepped back, gently touched Emma's shoulder, and nodded. The bearded man nodded at Emma. She nodded back. He then spoke to the people. "I move that I replace this man as Bishop of Blanding, and that this man be judged and sentenced by a jury within our community. Does anyone disagree?" No one did, but the bishop could see their eyes, their disgust. He could see the noose tighten, this time around his own neck, and he let out a pitiful, pleading cry. Emma turned and took Eli's hand. They smiled at each other. A tear cut through her war paint. Together, alongside the old man and the bird, a mother and son reunited, walked out the door, and stepped out together into the light. The bishop was hung in the town square the next week. Emma did not attend. The bearded man attempted to amend by bringing several men and rebuilding her cabin. After it was complete, he approached her and asked if she could ever find a way to forgive him. She would not. And she told him this. Even though she could see kindness inside him, she also saw a great weakness in his cowardness and actions the night her husband was killed. She said that God was the only one that could forgive him for that, not her. Eli was back with Emma and safe, but he was troubled. He couldn't fully understand what had happened to his father or the truth of what had been done to them. He was just too young and witnessed too many hard things. This is the reason the old man stayed. She could see this. And she was thankful for that every day. Eli came to love the old man, as did she. He and the boy formed a great bond. So did Huchu. Emma would tell her son everything, but this happened on her deathbed many, many years later. But now they had each other, and they were grateful. Each morning at dawn, they would pray together at the grave under the old juniper tree, sharing a good memory of her husband, his father, to help keep his memory alive. Sometimes the old man joined them, kneeling beside the stones and praying in his own language. She'd often find sage in little bundles on the grave. She let them remain now. Eli and the old man grew very close over those years. The boy learned to speak in his tongue, live in the old ways, and use plants for medicine. One morning when Eli was 15, and the old man was now a very old man, he came hobbling slowly to the cabin door with the ancient-looking Huchu still clinging to his shoulder. Emma, her face now lined with ranch work, sun and time greeted him. The boy and the old man spoke together in his language. She could tell something was wrong from Eli's face. Then, just as the old man had taught him, Eli bowed his head and gave a slow, respectful nod. The old man's shaky hands reached then to Emma, grabbing her shoulders, and gently he pressed his forehead to hers for several moments. Then he pulled back and smiled at her with warmth and peace. He then tapped his chest softly and said, "Gwina." She smiled and was happy to know his name after all these years. Huchu made a raspy sound from his perch on his shoulder. Not a proud cry as before, but a weak, brittle, dusty noise, the sound of age and fading strength. Then the old man with the blind old raven perched upon his shoulder slowly turned and walked toward the river. Emma was about to call out, to ask where he was going, but Eli gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He shook his head. His eyes were glistening. He was calm. Too calm. Too much like his father in that moment. He said it's his time, Eli said, that he was to finish walking the path that the great father laid down for him. He said he's proud of you and of me, that our paths may cross again in some other place, if it's meant to be. Emma looked at her son and saw his father. A deep love only learned through hard moments boiled inside her. She couldn't imagine her life if she'd chosen a different path, if she'd walked away all those years ago. If she hadn't met the old man, she would have never learned the strength that lived inside her all along. And in that moment, as she swelled with joy looking into Eli's eyes, her son's eyes, all her questions about God were answered. I call this story Redemption, written and performed by the author, me, James Cawley. The old frontier was never just a place. It was a crucible, where belief met survival, where the land held memory far older than the settlers who tried to tame it. For every hymn sung beneath unfinished rafters, there were echoes in the canyons, older voices that remembered what came before. And sometimes, amid fire and silence, ordinary people discovered they carried something stronger than fear, the will to rise. My name is James Cawley, and you're listening to Dust and Echoes. If you like stories like this, stories that walk the uneasy line between history and myth, that are slow-burning, haunting, and rooted in forgotten places, then you're in the right place. I'm glad I found you. If you want to support the podcast, you can purchase one of my books on Amazon. Just search for James Cawley and you'll find them. I have new stories waiting for you there now. You can also find a direct link to my books on our website at enterthedust.com. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. It really helps me more than you know. I release a new original story in cinematic audiobook format every single week, right here. And I think you'll love the next story. But until then, remember this: a fire can burn a home to ash, or fill it with light. It's not the flame that decides, only the hands that tend it.